I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of that laughter. It wasn't the kind of laughter you hear when people are amused when a joke lightens the air and fills the room with warmth. No, this was the sharp cutting kind, the kind that slices through your skin and makes you bleed inside. I was 36 years old, standing in the middle of a ballroom dripping with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. And all around me, people were laughing at me, their voices colliding into an echo I thought I'd never escape. On the table in front of me, in elegant blue calligraphy on cream cardstock, my place card didn't carry my name. It read, "Pathetic gold digger, nobody." My stomach dropped so fast I thought I'd faint. I had spent weeks preparing for this gala, carefully piecing myself back together after months of being chipped away by my husband's indifference and his boss's cold disdain. I had chosen the dark green dress he loved, fixed my hair in a style that felt sophisticated, and studied Reinhardt Tech's financial reports as if I were preparing for war. I wanted to walk into that room not just as Ryan's wife, but as a woman who belonged an equal, a partner, someone worth taking seriously. And then in a single moment I was stripped down to a cruel joke. The laughter spread like fire, a ripple of gasps and muffled giggles growing into something uncontrollable. I heard whispers. "Did you see what it says?" And then louder, one of the women at the table said, still clinging to him after all this time, as if my marriage itself were a pathetic stunt. My hands trembled as I held the card, but I forced myself to look at Ryan. I was waiting for outrage, for his arm around me, for him to tell them all to shut up, because this was his wife they were ridiculing. But when I turned, he couldn't even meet my eyes. He stared down at his water glass, like it held some secret he didn't want to reveal, his face tight, his shoulders stiff, not with anger, but with the shame of being caught in something he already knew. That was when the truth hit me, like ice water. This wasn't just Tyler's game, her vicious little masterpiece of humiliation. Ryan knew. My husband, the man I had built my life with, was complicit. The silence wasn't shock, it was agreement. In that instant, my marriage cracked wide open. I didn't cry, not in front of them. I wouldn't give them that. Instead, I lifted my chin, slipped the place card into my clutch, and turned toward the exit. As I passed the CEO, who was smirking behind her champagne glass, I bent just close enough for her to hear me over the laughter. My voice was steady, sharp as glass. "I'd check your stock prices if I were you." Her smile faltered just for a second, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked out of that ballroom alone, the sound of their laughter chasing me like a ghost. In the taxi home, tears finally spilled streaming down my cheeks until the driver kept glancing nervously at me in the mirror. I didn't have words for him. All I could manage was a whispered thank you when we pulled into the driveway. Ryan's car wasn't there. He was still at the gala, probably standing beside Tyler, maybe even laughing again, celebrating the destruction of the woman who had once been his partner in everything. That Sunday I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, playing it all over in my head. The clinking of glasses, the smirks, the cruelty that had been so carefully orchestrated. But as the hours passed, something shifted. The humiliation hardened into something else, something sharper. I remembered who I used to be, the woman who once exposed fraudulent accounting practices that saved a pension fund $12 million. The consultant whose research had been quoted in major financial publications. The woman Ryan used to brag about, the one he proudly introduced as the analyst who takes down corrupt corporations from our kitchen table. That woman wasn't gone. She had just been buried under years of compromise, of biting my tongue, of making myself smaller so Ryan could stand taller. And now they had made a mistake. Tyler with her predatory smile and calculated cruelty. Ryan with his silence that cut deeper than any insult. They had both underestimated me. On Monday morning, I sat down in my office with a cup of coffee that went cold as my fingers began to fly across the keyboard. My subscriptions to databases and corporate filings, things I had kept active just in case, suddenly felt like lifelines. Within an hour, I was combing through Reinhardt Tech's financial records, the familiar hunger burning in my chest again. Numbers never lie, not really. And if you pay attention closely enough, they tell you stories that people would kill to keep hidden. That's when I found the first irregularity executive stock option grants suspiciously timed around major announcements. It wasn't technically illegal, but it reeked of manipulation. And at the bottom of the approvals whose signature did I see Tyler Jameson. I felt the corners of my mouth lift into something that wasn't quite a smile, more like a vow. They thought they humiliated me into silence, but they had just woken me up. For days, I lost myself in numbers the way some people lose themselves in prayer. I would wake up, pour a cup of coffee, and sit at my desk until the city lights came on outside my window. Every spreadsheet, every filing, every market disclosure, I combed through them with a kind of fever I hadn't felt in years. And with each new inconsistency I uncovered, I felt that humiliation from the gala transform into something else. It became fuel. It became purpose. I pieced together a pattern. Reinhardt Tech wasn't just bending rules, they were snapping them in half and gluing the pieces back together with arrogance. Insider trading masked as lucky timing. Funds quietly rerouted through shell subsidiaries that shouldn't even exist. Bonuses inflated by manipulating performance data right before board reviews. Tyler's fingerprints were everywhere. And the more I dug, the more one detail emerged again and again. My husband Ryan's name wasn't missing from these documents. It was stamped on them like a co-signature. The night I found that, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the mouse. Ryan hadn't just stood by Tyler as she humiliated me, he had been her partner long before the gala. Together they had not only betrayed me personally, but entangled themselves in fraud that, if exposed, could send both of them spiraling into ruin. I sat there staring at his signature under hers, and for the first time in months, I didn't cry. I smiled. Because betrayal this deep deserved a reckoning just as deep. The next week, Ryan came home late again, smelling faintly of the cologne he only wore to galas and board dinners. He found me in the kitchen sipping tea, my laptop closed on the counter. He leaned in to kiss me, but I tilted my head away. The flicker of irritation in his eyes was small but unmistakable. "Rough week?" he asked, loosening his tie like he hadn't just left me to drown in humiliation days earlier. I wanted to scream, to throw the files in his face, to demand how long he'd been laughing behind my back. But instead I sipped my tea, calm, controlled, the way I had taught myself to be in interrogation rooms and boardrooms. "Something like that," I murmured. If he noticed the steel in my voice, he didn't comment. He had no idea that while he stood there pretending to be the tired, loyal husband, I had already printed binders of evidence. Copies secured in safe deposit boxes, others mailed to journalists who had been waiting for a story like this. The wheels were already turning. 2 days later, I scheduled a discreet meeting with someone I never thought I'd approach: the CEO of Reinhardt Tech, Eleanor Reinhardt herself. The same woman I had whispered to on my way out of the gala when I told her to check her stock prices. She had smirked then, but when she saw the documents I laid before her in her private office, her smirk melted. Her hands tightened around the pages, her eyes narrowing with every signature, every damning figure. If this is true," she whispered, "it could take down half my board." "It's not just true," I replied quietly, leaning forward. "It's provable. Every number ties back to Tyler and Ryan. They humiliated me to keep me quiet, but they didn't realize I was the wrong person to underestimate." Eleanor looked at me for a long moment, and I could almost hear her calculating. For a CEO, loyalty was currency, but survival was king. And I had just handed her survival on a silver platter. By the time I left her office, I knew the clock had started ticking. Tyler and Ryan's laughter at that gala had been the sound of their own hubris. Soon it would be replaced by the sound of doors slamming shut behind them. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, the city stretching endlessly outside my window. I thought about the years I had given Ryan, the sacrifices I had made, the way I had dimmed myself so his star could shine. And I thought about how quickly he had chosen to stand against me instead of beside me. It hurt, of course it did. The kind of hurt that burrows deep into your bones and makes you question if you'll ever trust again. But beneath that ache there was something else. A spark of power, of clarity. For the first time in years, I remembered who I was. I wasn't just a wife discarded like an old coat at a gala. I was a woman who could bring down an empire with nothing more than numbers, truth, and the will to fight. And I knew I wasn't done. The gala had been their stage, their performance of superiority. But the real show was only beginning, and this time I was writing the script. The storm broke sooner than I expected. Less than a week after my meeting with Eleanor, headlines began to ripple across the financial world. Reinhardt Tech, under federal investigation. Whispers of insider trading shake corporate elite. The articles didn't name names at first, but I didn't need them to. I knew exactly whose signatures were buried in those documents. Ryan came home pale that evening, his jaw tight, his tie knotted unevenly, as though he had yanked it on without thought. He poured a drink without speaking, the glass clinking against the counter harder than necessary. I sat at the dining table calmly scrolling through one of the very articles he was trying not to look at. "They're fishing," he muttered finally, his voice low, almost a growl. "Some jealous competitor stirring up smoke." I looked up at him and held his gaze, letting the silence stretch until he shifted uncomfortably. There was a time when his presence filled a room for me, when I leaned into the safety of his confidence. Now all I saw was fear dressed up as bravado. Over the next few days, the whispers turned into thunder. Federal subpoenas were issued. Journalists circled like hawks. Tyler's name appeared first, splashed across front pages with words like fraud, manipulation, indictment. Her glossy photos from charity luncheons and tech conferences suddenly looked grotesque under the weight of scandal. And then came Ryan. I watched the news the morning they announced him as a person of interest, sipping my coffee as if it were any other day. The anchor's voice was calm, professional, but the words cut like a blade. Ryan Bennett, Senior VP of Reinhardt Tech, linked to questionable transactions under investigation. He turned to me that night with fire in his eyes, accusing me of betrayal without saying the words out loud. "Did you talk to someone?" he demanded, his voice sharp. I met his anger with a cold stillness I didn't know I had in me. "Funny," I said softly, "that you assume I'd know anything about financial fraud." His eyes narrowed, searching my face for cracks, but I gave him none. For years, I had been the one to smooth his rough edges, to patch the holes in his story. Now I let the silence become its own weapon. Days later, I received a private message from Eleanor herself. A single line. "You were right. Thank you." It wasn't gratitude, not really. It was acknowledgement. She had used the information to carve herself out of the wreckage, pushing Tyler and Ryan forward as sacrificial lambs. That was fine by me. I hadn't done this for her approval. I had done it because I needed them to know what it felt like to be stripped bare in front of the world. The gala replayed in my mind, often the sound of laughter, the cruel words, Ryan's silence that had cut deeper than any insult. And now when I closed my eyes, I replaced it with the image of him walking into federal court cameras, flashing the smirk wiped clean off his face. But here's the thing, no one tells you about revenge. It doesn't erase the hurt. It doesn't stitch the wounds back together. Late at night, lying alone in bed, I still felt the ache of betrayal like a weight on my chest. I missed the man I thought I'd married, the life I thought we were building. I grieved for something that had never truly existed. Still, there was a strange kind of healing in the wreckage. The woman who had walked out of that ballroom humiliated was gone. In her place stood someone sharper, stronger, unwilling to shrink for anyone's comfort. One evening, I found the old place card tucked into my clutch, the cruel words still glaring in blue ink. Pathetic gold digger. Nobody. I held it in my hand, felt the paper crinkle between my fingers, and then I laughed. Not bitterly, not cruelly, just a low, knowing laugh. Because they had been wrong, I was never nobody. And now the whole world knew it. The day Ryan was officially indicted, the sky outside my window was gray, heavy with rain. It felt almost poetic, as though the world itself mirrored the storm that had been brewing in my life. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing like lightning. I watched it all on the news from my living room couch, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea I hadn't touched. There he was, my husband, the man who once kissed my forehead goodnight, the man who once promised me forever, walking into court with his head bowed, his lawyer shielding him from questions. And yet even then I felt no triumph, no sense of victory. Just a hollow ache that reminded me revenge may balance the scales, but it doesn't fill the emptiness left behind. Tyler fell hard and fast, her assets frozen, Her name dragged through every headline, her smug smile replaced by grim photos in handcuffs. Ryan's downfall was slower, more drawn out, the media dissecting every move, every whisper of his past. The company distanced itself, Eleanor taking center stage as the savior who had cleaned house. And I stayed in the background watching the empire collapse from the quiet safety of my apartment. Friends called me brave, colleagues reached out with admiration. But bravery wasn't what I felt. What I felt was exhaustion. The kind that seeps into your bones when the fight is over and all that's left is silence. One evening, weeks after the indictment, I sat at my desk, staring at the last piece of evidence I had kept for myself, the place card from the gala. The words that once cut me to the core now looked small, pathetic, powerless against everything I had survived. I thought about burning it, about turning the ashes into some symbolic closure. But instead, I tucked it into a folder of old photographs. A reminder. Not of humiliation, but of the night I chose to rise instead of break. Because that was the real turning point, wasn't it? Not when Ryan was exposed, not when Tyler was arrested, but when I walked out of that ballroom with my head held high, whispering a single sentence to the CEO that shifted the balance of power. That was the night I stopped being their victim and started reclaiming myself. Still, the scars remain. Betrayal doesn't heal cleanly. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if Ryan ever loved me at all or if I was just another pawn in the game he played with Tyler. Sometimes I lie awake hearing their laughter, sharp and cruel, echoing in the back of my mind. But then I remind myself I am not defined by their cruelty. I am defined by what I did with it. Now at 36, I am rebuilding. Not just my career, which has taken on new life as journalists and companies alike seek my expertise, but my sense of self. The woman who once dimmed her light to let her husband shine is gone. In her place stands someone who knows her worth, who will never again let someone else write her story in ink meant to humiliate. If you've made it this far into my story, maybe you felt it too. The sting of betrayal, the weight of humiliation, the fire of reclaiming your power. And if you have, I want you to know this. You are not powerless. Even in the moments when the world laughs at you, even when the people closest to you turn their backs, you still have a choice. You can let it break you, or you can let it sharpen you into something unshakable. I chose to rise, and I hope you will too. If this story touched you, if you've ever had to claw your way back from betrayal, please like this video, share it with someone who needs strength, and subscribe for more stories like mine. And don't forget to leave a comment. I want to hear your story too. Because in sharing, we remind each other that we are not alone.